Here we go. Anna Bogdanok. So great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Suzanne. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Fantastic. Awesome. So we haven't actually connected in a little while. Last time we spoke, you were still an undergrad at Brown University, but now you are liberated. How's it going?
It's going well. As you said, I graduated about a month ago. I'm starting my full-time job in a few weeks, and I'm very excited for the transition.
Fantastic. Yeah. And how are you finding Boston?
Oh, I love it. Providence has been really good to me, and college has been really good to me, but it's exciting to be in a real city for once.
And you went to Brown University, yeah?
Yes, yes, I did. Studied economics at class of 2021.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on graduating. That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
And so, what does post grad life hold for you?
So I will be working in economic consulting. This is a job that I actually got through interning at the place where I will be working at, and networking and talking to a bunch of different people was very helpful in terms of figuring out what I wanted to do. And I spent the first 2 years of my college career really talking to everyone about what they did. And I'm very happy that I learned about what I guess is a less known type of consulting, but something that's a really good personality fit for me.
Now, did you know did you change your degree, or you already knew that you were going to be in economics?
Oh, yeah, I actually came in as an education major,
Hmm.
and I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I did an extracurricular activity where I got in front of the classroom and I realized that I did not, in fact, want to be a teacher, but I'm still very interested in different ways of improving the education system. So I took an economics of education class, and I just thought that kind of the combination of more quantitative tools was looking at people issues was like a really good fit for me. And I've loved all my economics classes ever since.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, so I think, if someone is younger and they're thinking about, or they're just in college and they're not sure what they want to do, to actually do that research really has paid off for you.
And I'm very lucky to have had a lot of mentors who encouraged me to network and connect with people.
That's fantastic. What are some of your favorite networking tools and techniques and connecting with people?
So I'll say one of my favorite pieces of advice that I got from people was when you go into a networking conversation, think about like one thing you can leave with. It could be whether contact information of someone who like you will connect with in the future, or maybe a book recommendation, or like a very practical like one piece of advice. So I have like a spreadsheet with everyone I've spoken to and kind of the one thing that stuck with me. And
Yeah.
like looking back, it's been really helpful because I have these conversations from like 2018, and I still like remember like the one thing that I got out of them. If also for me in the beginning, as I guess for a lot of college students, networking can be a little bit of like an intimidating thing. And I was very scared of it. And one of my career counselors really reframed how I thought about it by like telling me that the goal was obtaining information rather than, like asking someone for a job, and just like coming in with like an open mind and just like trying to soak up all the information and all the knowledge from the people has been very helpful.
Fantastic. Is there a piece of advice that's popping into your head right now?
I think it's pretty generic, but just like people have like really encouraged me to try as many different things as I can, like even things that you may not think that you like may like, and just being like also just like being honest to yourself about like not liking certain things. Like for example, I had a stage where I was very interested in finance because a lot of economics people were, and just like when I tried out some of the finance things, I realized it wasn't a good personality fit, and just like being honest with yourself and like recognizing that there are certain things that I just don't like has been extremely helpful.
That's fantastic. So what other and as you're job hunting, right, and you're interviewing, although it sounds like you had already laid a lot of that groundwork. But
Yeah,
what
it
any
was
tips along
definitely.
those lines?
Mm, I I think for me it has been very helpful to think of interviews as like a two-way street, like not just, you know, putting like obviously putting my best foot forward and really representing myself, but also gauging how the people at the company are and what the company culture is like. And really, I think I at some point had like a mental shift of like realizing that like maybe some places may not be good fits for me and like rejection is okay because it doesn't necessarily mean that there is something wrong with me. And I think like also as you mentioned, like networking has laid such a big groundwork, and just even like having spoken to people before applying to companies has been so enlightening because I already kind of knew what good questions to ask or maybe what to expect. And I think the advice I've gotten from one of the career counselors at Brown was that 70% of your job hunt should just be like laying the groundwork through networking. And that's kind of what I stuck with. And it definitely made such a big difference because a lot of times, like, I knew what companies to apply to, I knew what the position entailed, I kind of knew what I was looking for.
That's fantastic. And you worked with the Career Center also as, in was that like a work study program or?
Yeah, so I started there as a, gosh, I think a freshman, and I was just doing front desk stuff, but I eventually transitioned into a peer career advisor role, which was all about helping students work on their resumes, their cover letters, doing mock interviews, and like giving people advice on networking. And I really, that was like one of my favorite things I've ever done in college, just because I think the job hunt and like networking are things that college students tend to be afraid of. But once you like get into it, it's so interesting and you just learn so much.
I love it. Yeah. So you're the perfect person to interview.
Thank you.
What do you think? What did you see as a very common mistake that obviously Brown University students are quite bright, getting their bachelor's degrees? But what are some of the common mistakes that you saw and advice for fixing those?
And one of the most common things would be people who would just sit there, spend a lot of their time sending out their resumes and cover letters everywhere, kind of missing the groundwork of networking, of going to informational events, of just even researching the companies. Like I think from reading student cover letters in particular, you can really tell when someone has done their research versus like a copy paste cover letter that goes towards all the companies. And I think that we need to normalize this like informational interviewing and having conversations with people like before you even like apply to jobs.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What about, in terms of career advice in general? Once you get into your career, does Brown, what do they tell you about professional development and areas like that?
Mhm. I think that it kind of really, Brown does have a system with like the career services where when you come in, you can get a lot of professional development. But if you never wanted to step your foot into the career services and if you never wanted to learn about anything, like they're not going to really go after you. I think that kind of a lot of the advice we get is learning more about your personality. Like a lot of the people will do like the Myers-Briggs test, but also just a lot of different career assessments, and also just being honest about your like goals, your values, and your interests, and just like finding a career that fits all of them. And we also, a lot of the advice we get is that your first job doesn't have to be the perfect job and is probably not going to be the perfect job. And I've heard the statistic that like people on average go through I think 6 jobs before they turn 30. And that was
Really?
very
Wow.
eye-opening to me. I don't unfortunately have the source for it because I just heard it from a counselor at one point, but I'm pretty sure, at least for Brown, that's accurate. So just realizing that every job is like a valuable opportunity, but may not be the perfect fit. So just like continuing to search and like learning in different kind of pathways.
That's also the best way to be boosting your salary because if you're not, I think this isn't really discussed enough that if you're not actively, aggressively, somewhat aggressively pushing your career forward, pushing your professional development forward, you're actually losing out. There's a statistic out there that says whatever you are making when you're, let's say, 40, you're probably capping out somewhere between 40 and 45. So it's really important to make sure that you use that time because that's when you're building your 401k and your retirement. And, there's a lot of pieces to it. And I think going into jobs that, you may not see the financial results are a little, that can be an issue, and or staying in a job for too long where you're not advancing your salary in particular. So it sounds like that advice is out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
we
crazy.
met through a really fun project, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about 180 Consulting and what that was like for your experience at Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Suzanne mentioned, we met through something called 180 Degrees Consulting. It's a student consulting organization with branches at lots and lots of different universities, with Brown being one of them. And the way it works is that we do projects of like student consultants who work with local nonprofits for a semester. It could be on anything. It could be on like marketing, website design, any financial advice, fundraising advice, and you essentially work with an organization throughout the semester. And hopefully, the output is like a consulting presentation, slide deck with lots of recommendations. And 180 has been one of the most life changing parts of my college experience. So I think a lot of the things we learn in the classroom, while they're really great, they are a little bit removed from how organizations work, especially like nonprofit organizations, and just having the ability to work with an organization throughout the semester, see kind of the inner workings, even just like see how, for example, with a lot of nonprofits, there's like one person kind of doing everything, or just like sometimes the recommendations you learn in the classroom aren't necessarily financially viable, even if they're like academically most rigorous. So just like learning how to be realistic and learning how the organizations work has been really eye-opening. And for example, was like Suzanne, she was a consultant for one of the organizations that we worked with, and that was a very unique experience for a lot of our students because they'll like know what a consultant is supposed to be, but they had never experienced what it would be like to see like how a consultant is working with an organization.
Yeah, you guys did a great job though. The team did a really fantastic job in terms of researching sponsorship packages and ways that the nonprofit who was my client, how they can, and it was really fun to see the results. And I think the work that you did or that the team did really was advancing this nonprofit's organization pretty significantly. They've since made a number of shifts in terms of their priorities, which have saved some money by having that strategy in place. They were able to shift some responsibilities to less experienced people because they had the strategy in place. So I think the work was really great, very solid, and loved how the team worked together. And your role, you didn't work specifically on this project, but you had more of a leadership role with
Yeah.
the Brown site. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So I've been a member of 180 since I think my sophomore year. So most people kind of start out as consultants and then eventually many people move on to leadership roles. And I was a consulting director, which essentially meant that I was the one recruiting organizations to work with, and then staffing people on projects and kind of throughout the semester making sure that the client to like student interactions were okay and that the student work was meeting the standard that the client set forward. And especially as an international student who has never lived in Rhode Island until 2017, it was just very exciting to even like dig into like all the local organizations, all the amazing work that's being done. And just like I loved hopping on calls with every single one of our clients and just learning more about the work that they do. And we had clients like ranging from education to like environmental justice or healthcare. So just like being able to learn about such different fields has been really interesting.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's really, Rhode Island is a unique little place. I heard a statistic from the Rhode Island Foundation that Rhode Island has more nonprofits than any other state in the country, which that seems
Wow.
very elusive, but I imagine is accurate. I mean, they would know because they're sort of the clearinghouse of all nonprofits in the state.
But it was definitely like we were making like spreadsheets of all the organizations that were active, and I couldn't even imagine that there were so many. It was insane.
And tell me a little bit about the project that you worked on, because you did work on a project with the team this semester, yeah?
Yeah. So I was supervising a team that worked with Genesis Center. The Genesis Center is an organization that does a lot of work with migrant and refugee communities, like going from English classes to professional development classes and childcare. And one specific branch of Genesis that we were working on is this new restaurant that they're hoping to open in the Providence Public Libraries. It's going to be called Chop. It's like all official now, so I'm allowed to talk about it. But basically, they
That's so
have this
great.
really cool culinary arts program where they recruit a lot of like migrant low income workers who go through this culinary arts training and then can hopefully work in like local restaurants, for example. And now they're building this their own restaurant where the workers can gain experience as they're being trained to make them make them more in demand in like local restaurants, which is very exciting. And also they would be able to like showcase food from their cultures and to just also like share more about Genesis with the local community. And it's going to be in the public libraries, so just downtown. And what we were specifically working on was just figuring out more about the brand identity of the restaurant, like how it should be marketed. We were doing a lot of surveys to figure out which parts of Genesis and which parts of Chop would most appeal to the potential like clients. So what should be emphasized in marketing? And this was one of my first projects where we were able to like actually go out there and survey people and do like interviews. So it was really cool to not just be doing research, but also be coming in was the information that we gathered that was primary source, because the organization themselves, they probably wouldn't have the time or like the people to do that, but we were able to do it, which was very cool.
Yeah, I have to say that the work that the teams do is pretty remarkable. And it's very similar to the semester long courses that I developed, which actually was adapted from a course that I did in grad school where we did work with a nonprofit and do something similar. You know, we did a strategic public relations plan for a organ donor organization in South Carolina, and that they were super excited, and we did a lot of great work, and I adapted that into the courses that I taught, and all the nonprofits really loved it and thought it was so great because, like you said, they don't have time really to focus on these things.
And it's also definitely such a wonderful educational experience for the students. Like I'm sure your students and like all the students at Brown have been incredibly grateful to have had the chance to be led into the organization and like be allowed to witness the inner workings, because that's just not something that you can really learn in the classroom until you see it for yourself.
Yeah, and it was super fun actually presenting to the 180 consulting group at Brown. and just talking about, initially you said, oh, can you talk about, what did you say, for profit versus nonprofit consulting? And that was really interesting, in terms of we shifted that to getting a panel together. And
Yeah.
we had some great speakers for that. And then I did a solo on LinkedIn
Yes.
and building your network.
Actually, yes. Actually, after your presentation, I got a bunch of LinkedIn requests from all the 180 members because I think students started getting it onto LinkedIn. So we definitely have you to thank for that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and you're going to be a huge resource for them because there's so much to be said. I just did a reference um, from my intern from last year who is applying for a new position, and yeah, it's huge, like to work alongside someone. The person who's hiring them, one of the questions was cultural fit, like how is this person going to fit culturally, and I said, well, all my interns work remote, so that's a little bit hard to answer specifically, but I would say that, they're enthusiastic and efficient and really are humble and hungry is the terms that I've heard before that you kind of want. And that's what I go for pretty significantly, is having somebody who really wants to learn but doesn't think that they know everything.
Mhm. Those
Awesome.
are two very, very important traits.
Yeah. What are some of the questions that you were asked in your interviews?
Oh, so I've gotten a lot of, I think when I was preparing for interviews, people would tell me to prepare those like tell me about the time XYZ happened questions. And when I heard about that, my initial reaction was like, oh, I bet no one asks those in real life. Like that just doesn't sound real. And that was like the top question I would be asked, like tell me about a time you worked in a team successfully, or tell me about a time you showed leadership. And one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten from people was to think through 3 to 5 scenarios that you can kind of fit into a lot of different boxes. So when you're asked like a tell me about the time question, you kind of have something that will fit even if you have never practiced that specific question before. I've
Nice.
recently, I think like one of the more recent, and maybe I've gone through essentially 2 periods of being interviewed. One was in my sophomore year, and the other one was in my junior year. And in my junior year, a lot more companies asked me about how I handled like failure or how I handled my weaknesses. And it was very helpful to just like think through what my weaknesses are and how I've been working on them, so that it wasn't just me like saying like a bad thing about myself. It was more like this is something that's not good, but this is what I've done to improve on it.
Yeah, yeah. I think and those are lifelong pursuits, right? And obviously, you want to pick something that's fairly common or innocuous, like I hit the snooze button a lot, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, like the first time I practiced that question, I went to a career counselor and did a mock interview, and I told them something, like I told them like a very long like personal story, and they were like, "Great, thank you for sharing. Please never say this in an interview ever."
Oh man, that's rough. Yeah, I was the interviewing piece. I think is the most stressful part of job searching. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it never really, at least for me, it never really got better. I think for me, there's been a significant improvement in how I have performed during my interviews, but I still the first 5 minutes, still super nauseous, still super nervous, and but I do think that like practicing has been very helpful. And one of the like a lot of the roles I was going for, they really valued communication. And one of the things that I did to prepare was I was interviewing for like more technical positions, and I asked my roommate at a time who was an English major to like listen to me talk and flag when things didn't make sense. And when it got to a point where I could coherently explain my projects or my interests to someone who knew nothing about economics, that like was very helpful because I feel like I stopped getting lost in my train of thoughts.
Wow, that is fantastic. And also you're in a high trust situation, so you can really just narrow in and focus on what you're trying to do instead of feeling like you have to be super polished. You're mostly focusing on the content. How much time do you think you put into preparing for your interviews?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that when I was kind of in the prime time of interviewing, I essentially treated it as my fifth class. Like I'd say I spent around like 10 hours per week on each one of my classes. And then I'd say like around 8 to 10 on just like all career related stuff. I just block out that time. And some week it would just be sending networking emails. Other weeks it would be just like hardcore, like practicing mock interviews with everyone, or just like taking bullet points while like researching companies. But I was very lucky to have access to Brown's Career Services, and we can do mock interviews with career counselors and like an unlimited amount of like number of those. So essentially, when I was interviewing, I would do at least one 30-minute mock per week, like during the weeks where I like knew I had an interview lined up.
Wow, that's significant.
I'm also like not a natural interview, like I'm not, I guess, a natural like talker, not a natural like interviewee. So I also recognized that, and I knew that for me, maybe the more technical parts or like writing a cover letter, that would be something that I would spend less time on than other people. But interviews, I'd probably need to spend like an above average amount of time. And it was helpful to recognize that and then just like work on it.
Yeah, but English is not your first language also. So let's put that
Yeah.
out there. So it's even more impressive, right, that you've taken this extra time to really dedicate to polishing your self presentation skills when you're talking about yourself. And I would feel, or I would think that you would be confident, right, if it weren't about you per se, if you were presenting data, that you would have struggled with it less. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also a cultural thing. Originally from Ukraine, and we just don't talk about ourselves. And when we talk about ourselves, you kind of have to humble yourself up. So when I would do interviews in the beginning, and when they would ask like, "What is your greatest strength?" I would say something, but then I would make sure it didn't sound like I was boasting because I didn't realize that you were like actually supposed to hype yourself up.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's tricky, I think, no matter what, because we're just socialized to try to fit in with the group and get along with people, and then part of that is not to run around and say like I'm the best person there ever was. I'm way better than all you guys. you know, that's part of the deal, right? So when you have to flip the tables, but that does take practice and feeling comfortable with it. So I think that's fantastic that you dedicated all that time. And then I'm just curious too. So for the 180 projects, um, how much time were you dedicating to that?
Mm. So we do actually have like a number of hours that's expected. When a student joins, they should be spending about 3 to 5 hours per week on the project. I think kind of in from what I've seen so far in like my consulting experience, like also outside of 180, it really ebbs and flows. And I think it kind of is the same with 180, where some weeks are significantly less intense, and then other weeks, maybe you're doing like a bunch of surveys, or maybe you're prepping the final slide deck. So then 5 hours a week becomes like 10 hours a week.
Yeah, it ebbs and flows, like you said. Yeah, great. So any, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We do try to keep these a little bit short. Where do you see yourself in 3 or 5 years? Thoughts?
Oh,
The
a
challenge
lot
question.
of possible thoughts. That's actually what I'm trying to figure out by talking to a bunch of people right now and back on the networking conversation. But I could be getting a PhD in economics, or I could be going to business school and kind of hopefully also working on kind of the communication and like the negotiation part of things. But I'm very excited to work for a while now and then continue my education because I've loved school and I would love to be back.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're a lifelong learner for sure. So you'll be learning in your position every day. So it's going to be really
Absolutely.
exciting. Any other tips or things that you want to mention?
I say I feel like people who listen to podcasts like that are like the people who like I really admire, and people who like got it right because they're like working on educating themselves. And I think just like being open to all sorts of information through like listening to podcasts like that, just like talking to anyone, like never being afraid to talk to anyone, whether
Sorry.
the joys of working from home, but, and never being afraid of talking to anyone. Just like I feel like everyone, most of us are nice human beings who are always like happy to grab coffee with someone or ask like answering their questions. And I think it took me a long time to get to the point of like not being afraid to ask. So like just like not being afraid to talk to people and not being afraid to learn, like two big things that I would advise everyone.
That is so fantastic, right? To just be willing to talk to people and see what they have to say and how they can contribute to the conversation. And I think a lot of people are very receptive to helping recent grads and emerging professionals. That's one of the great things with ROI and U, that we have this whole network of people who are specialists and experts in what they do, but they also are happy to help our students and support their growth, um, whether it's instructing them directly or giving them advice on projects. It's very similar to 180, um, but just more compressed and not really while you're in school. So we try to keep it to a couple hours a day, Monday through Thursday, working on our projects, working with our experts, and then we roll that into a short internship and then during the interview phase and get everybody placed. So we're super excited for our next cohort. And
Wow.
but Anna, we will be checking in with you to see how things are going with your new career, and it's
Thank
really
you.
exciting for a recent grad. Such a fun time of life.
And thank you so much for having me. This was so, so, so much fun.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, thank you, Anna. Okay, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.